A homeless man intervenes to save a child from bullies, but when he discovers the identity of the boy's father, he is left speechless. Josue lay under the bridge, wrapped in a tattered cardboard blanket that barely protected him from the biting cold of the night. The city's smell, mixed with the sweet yet rotten aroma of garbage, was his everyday reality. He watched other homeless people, some sleeping, others whispering to each other, as life rushed by above them, ignoring their existence. The bridge, an unlikely shelter, had become his home, a place where he could lose himself in sad thoughts, reminiscing about happier times with his wife and daughter. Suddenly, screams and cruel laughter sliced through the tranquility of the place. Josue stood up curious and followed the sounds. Upon reaching a nearby square, he saw a group of boys surrounding a small kid, with messy hair and eyes full of fear. The boy, who looked to be around 10 years old, was trying to defend himself, but the bullies laughed and shoved him from side to side. "Hey, stop that!" Josue shouted, his voice echoing with a strength he hadn't felt in a long time. Adrenaline surged through his body and he approached without hesitation. The presence of a large, imposing man, even dressed in dirty, ragged clothes, made the boys hesitate. With a determined gesture, Josue pushed one of the aggressors, sending him tumbling backward. "Do you think this is fun? This is cowardice." The boys, taken by surprise, began to back away, and within moments, the group dispersed, leaving the trembling boy with tears in his eyes. Josue knelt beside him, trying to gauge the intensity of the fear that still lingered in the air. "It's okay now. They won't hurt you again," Josue said, his voice softer now as he looked into the boy's eyes. "What's your name?" "Pedro," the boy replied, his voice trembling. He wiped his tears with the sleeve of his shirt. "Thank you. You saved me." Pedro's eyes sparkled, and it was clear that gratitude mingled with admiration. "You don't need to thank me," Josue replied, smiling encouragingly. "Everyone deserves to be treated with respect, and you're not alone. We'll find a way to deal with this together." Pedro nodded, a faint smile beginning to form on his face. "You're strong. I wish I could be like you." The connection between them was palpable, a spark of empathy that lit up the dark moment. Josue felt a warmth in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Strength isn't just about muscles. Sometimes it takes courage to face what's inside us. He remembered his own internal struggle, the pain and emptiness that followed the tragedy that transformed his life. Pedro, still hesitant, looked at Josue with curiosity. "Do you live here?" "Yes, I'm going through a tough time." Josue hesitated, but the child's sincerity encouraged him to open up a bit more. "I lost some very important people in my life, and well, I don't have a place to stay." "I'm sorry," Pedro said, his gaze filled with compassion. "You shouldn't be alone." Josue was taken aback. The boy's sensitivity touched him. "It's hard sometimes, but you shouldn't face this alone either. If you need someone, I'm here. Do you want to be my friend?" Pedro asked, hope evident in his voice. "Of course, Pedro. Being friends is a good start," Josue replied, feeling that maybe, just maybe, he could find a new purpose in this unexpected friendship. In that moment, under the bridge that harbored his pain, a new seed of hope began to sprout, uniting two lives that until then seemed so distant from each other. Josue and Pedro began to meet regularly, and each encounter became more special. It was a moment they both looked forward to. The former civil engineer, who had grown accustomed to solitude and despair, found in the boy a reason to smile again. They would sit under the bridge where Josue often slept, and share snacks that Pedro brought from home. The boy always arrived with a sandwich and a bottle of juice, and despite being little, it felt like a feast to Josue. "You don't have to bring food, kid. I don't want your mom to get mad," Josue said one time, looking at the lunch Pedro had placed between them. "She won't get mad. I borrowed it," Pedro replied, winking with a mischievous smile. "She doesn't even notice I took it. Plus, you need to eat. You can't be strong on just water." Josue laughed. It was such a rare sound that he surprised himself by letting it out. "You're a smart kid, you know. But what do you want to know about me?" "I'm just an engineer without a job now. I want to know everything. What's it like working with big things like buildings and bridges?" Pedro asked, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Have you ever built something big?" "Yes, I have. A really tall building, actually. It had a beautiful view from the top where you could see the whole city." Josue began to recount, memories flooding his mind. "But sometimes I wonder if it's all worth it. What's a construction if there's no one to admire it?" Pedro frowned. You should show it to someone. If I were you, I'd show off the cool things you made. There has to be someone who cares. The boy's determination touched Josue in a way he didn't expect. He remembered his old job, the joy of seeing people enjoying the buildings he had designed. That's true. I used to feel that way, doing something that helped people. Then you can help fix the park, Pedro exclaimed, his enthusiasm filling the air around them. It's all broken and dull, but if you work on it, it'll be amazing. The kids will love it. Josue hesitated. The idea seemed absurd, but at the same time, a spark of hope ignited in his heart. But I don't have tools or money for that. You don't need money. We can gather everyone and do a fundraiser. I can help ask others. Everyone loves a beautiful park. Pedro argued, his energy almost palpable. Do you really think we can do this? Josue asked, feeling something inside him beginning to change. Of course. Look, I'll talk to the kids at school and we'll make it happen. You just need to want it, Pedro said with a confidence that made Josue reconsider his limitations. He looked at the boy and saw not just a friend, but someone who, in a way, was pulling him back to life. Okay, let's try, Josue finally replied, a hesitant smile forming on his face. But you'll have to help me plan everything. I'm not so good at organizing things anymore. Leave it to me. I'm great at planning, and if you need help, Clara can also assist. She knows everything about what we need to do, Pedro said, excited. Josue realized that the boy not only saw him as a friend, but as a mentor, someone who could still make a difference. The following days were filled with informal meetings under the bridge. Josue and Pedro organized what they needed to do, and how they could mobilize other homeless people and the neighborhood children. Their relationship grew stronger, and Josue began to see Pedro as a son, while Pedro found in Josue the father figure he had longed for. I never thought I could do this again, Josue said one afternoon as they sketched plans for the park in the sand. Feeling like I'm contributing to something? Pedro smiled. You're doing more than that. You're helping me, and that's really special. You're like a superhero, Josue. Josue's heart swelled with emotion. The connection forming between them was more powerful than he could have ever imagined. With every conversation, every shared laugh, and every plan drawn up, he began to feel more alive, more hopeful. The shadow of the bridge, which once seemed like a shelter of pain, now felt like a place of new possibilities, where redemption and friendship blossomed. Roberto, a successful man, sat in a meeting room at his company, surrounded by colleagues who admired him. He was the epitome of what many considered an ideal father. Successful, respected, and always dressed in a sharp suit. However, behind the facade of success, Roberto felt distant, almost invisible to his son Pedro. It was as if an invisible fog separated him from the boy, and he couldn't see how to dissipate it. As others discussed plans for the company's expansion, Roberto glanced at his phone, which vibrated incessantly on his desk. It was a message from Pedro. Dad, are you coming to the school presentation tomorrow? I really wish you could be here. He hesitated, staring at the screen while his colleagues continued to debate. Pedro's message was a simple request, but for Roberto, it was a reminder of his absence in his son's life. Are you there, Roberto? What do you think about these projections? A colleague called out, interrupting his thoughts. Roberto smiled superficially and joined the conversation, but his mind kept wandering. He felt like an imposter, hiding the pain of a father who couldn't be present. When he returned home that night, the tension between him and his wife became palpable. You still haven't replied to Pedro's message, have you? She confronted him as soon as he walked through the door, and Roberto felt cornered. I'm busy with work, you know that. Life isn't easy, Roberto replied defensively. But he needs you, Roberto. He needs the father you promised to be. Her voice trembled, and Roberto could see the frustration in her eyes. He knew there was truth in her words, but the pressure to be a perfect father left him apathetic. That night, as he tried to fall asleep, Roberto reflected on his childhood. He remembered moments when his own father had been absent, focused solely on work and success. I'm not my father, he thought, but the doubt lingered. What was he really doing to change that cycle? The next morning, he decided to meet a friend for coffee. The atmosphere at the cafe was relaxed, and Roberto sought comfort in his friend's words. You know, Roberto, sometimes we get lost in work and forget what really matters. You're there for your son, but he needs to feel that, his friend said while stirring his coffee. Roberto sighed, frustration evident in his eyes. I feel like I'm failing as a father. The pressure I'm putting on him is for his own good, but am I just pushing him away? Maybe you should try to connect with him differently. Remember, being a father doesn't just mean providing. It's about being present, showing that you care. What he really needs is your love and support," his friend advised, placing a hand on Roberto's shoulder. The words echoed in Roberto's mind as he left the cafe. He realized he needed to do something. Pedro needed him, and if he truly wanted to change the dynamic between them, it was time to act. However, in the back of his mind, there remained a shadow of doubt. He didn't know if he had the ability to change, if he could break the barrier he had built over the years. But the thought of losing Pedro haunted him. He decided that instead of ignoring his son's invitation, he would attend the school presentation. Meanwhile, Josue, who had become an important figure in Pedro's life, was also struggling with his own demons. He felt the pressure of his past and the pain of loss, but also the desire to be a father to Pedro. He knew that the friendship he was building with the boy was precious, but what would happen when the truth about his connection to Roberto came to light? With each passing day, the tension increased. Josue watched from a distance, perceiving Roberto's struggle, but also Pedro's pain, caught between two worlds. What would happen when those worlds finally collided? Josue felt that, in some way, the truth needed to be revealed, but the weight of that revelation made him hesitant. Roberto, in his journey of self-discovery, was beginning to realize that what truly mattered was the love he could give to his son, not the success he had achieved. He needed to find a balance between the worlds he had created, and perhaps, just perhaps, the key to that lay in the connection Pedro had with Josue. Josue walked through the city streets with a new purpose in mind. After saving Pedro, the boy who seemed to carry a world of sadness, his life began to gain new meaning. The connection that had formed between them was not just about rescue. It was as if they had found a lost piece of each other. However, he also knew he needed to reconnect with society, and so he decided to reach out to other homeless people. On a sunny afternoon, Josue sat on a worn wooden bench in the square, where several homeless individuals gathered. The smell of food from nearby stalls mixed with the aroma of coffee that Clara, an elderly woman with gray hair and a warm smile, was brewing. She had been one of the first to approach Josue, offering him a bowl of soup and sincere advice. "You know, Josue, life on the streets doesn't have to be all suffering," Clara said as she stirred the hot liquid in a pot. "We all have our stories, but we also have the capacity to change our destiny." Josue listened to her attentively. He liked the way Clara spoke, as if each word was a reminder that there was still hope. "I just don't know where to start," he replied, looking down at the ground, feeling the weight of his pain and guilt. "Start by helping others. Sometimes pain eases when we offer a little light to those around us. How about we organize something to improve this place?" Clara suggested, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. The idea resonated with Josue. He had been a civil engineer, someone who built and renovated, and the prospect of doing something similar, even on a small scale, ignited a flame within him. "You're right," Josue affirmed, his expression brightening. "We can do something to give the kids a better place to play." With Clara's help and the support of other residents, Josue began planning a cleanup and renovation event for the local park. As they discussed ideas, he realized there was something magical about bringing people together who shared the same desire for change. The conversations flowed and the positive energy felt contagious. "We'll need paint, brushes, and maybe some food donations for those who come to help," Josue said, sketching out a plan on a crumpled piece of paper. "What do you think about having a picnic at the end?" Clara suggested excitedly. The kids love food and fun. Days passed quickly, and Josue found himself increasingly involved. He and Pedro began meeting, and the boy was thrilled about the idea of helping with the park's renovation. "We're going to make the park the best place in the city," Pedro exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement. "Exactly, and I'll teach you how to paint," Josue replied, feeling a swell of pride in his chest. With each meeting, their friendship grew stronger. On the day of the event, the park was alive with activity. Many people, including homeless residents, children, and even some neighbors, gathered to help. Josue, with a brush in one hand and a bucket of paint in the other, felt he was finally reclaiming a piece of his former life. "Look, Josue," Pedro shouted as he struggled to reach the top of the fence. "I'm making the best paint job ever." "Be careful," Josue laughed, watching the boy try to balance. "And if you fall, remember that the important thing is to get up and try again." Clara approached, holding a snack she had prepared. "You two are an amazing duo," she remarked, her smile lighting up her face. "Josue, you're bringing hope back to all of us." Josue felt warmed by her words. It was the first time in a long while that he felt part of something bigger, something that wasn't just about his own pain. It was about community, about the connections that could be made and the lives that could be changed. "Thank you, Clara. That means a lot to me," he said, looking at her face, where an expression of pride shone brightly. As the sun set, the park began to take on a new look. The laughter of children echoed in the air, and Josue realized that just as he was helping Pedro, he was now helping himself find a new path, a new family among those who shared his pain and his hope. Josue sat on one of the weathered wooden benches in the park, watching the children play in the distance. Their laughter and joy felt so far removed from his reality. He closed his eyes, allowing memories to flood his mind like an old film, slowly rolling. Images of his wife, Anna, and their little daughter, Sophia, emerged in his memory, illuminating the dark space where his soul resided. "You're not going to let Mommy catch you, are you?" The soft voice of Anna echoed in his mind. He could see the scene perfectly. Sophia, with her curly hair and a yellow dress that Anna had chosen, running toward him with open arms. "Daddy, Daddy!" she shouted, her laughter ringing like music. Josue felt a wave of pain wash over him as he remembered the purity and joy that filled those moments. "I will always protect you, my little one," he whispered as if Sophia were still there. Josue's eyes filled with tears and he quickly wiped them away, not wanting to be seen like this. It felt like a sign of weakness, a reminder of what he had lost. The accident that took his family away was still an open wound, a black hole that consumed him. He recalled that fateful day as if it were yesterday, the sound of the impact, Anna's desperate scream as she saw the car speeding toward them, and then the deafening silence that followed. He couldn't understand how life could be so cruel. "Josue?" Clara's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She approached, her expression filled with concern. "I was looking for you. Are you okay?" "I'm just thinking," he replied, trying to hide the pain he felt. "It's hard not to think about the past sometimes. I understand. We all carry our burdens," Clara said, sitting down beside him. "But you know, it's important to remember the good things too. Anna and Sophia would always be proud of you." Josue nodded, but the pain felt like a shadow that wouldn't lift. "I remember when I won the Best Engineer of the Year award. Anna was so happy. She always said I was the best at what I did." He smiled at the memory, but his expression soon turned somber. "Now look at me. I'm just a man living under a bridge." "You can be more than that, Josue," Clara said, determination in her voice. "You are strong. Look at how you helped that boy, Pedro. You're making a difference in his life." "Pedro," he murmured, recalling the sparkle in the boy's eyes when he had defended him. "He needs someone. I see that. But what am I to him?" "You are the father figure he never had," Clara replied, with a firm look. "You have the chance to be what you always wanted to be. Sometimes life gives us unexpected opportunities." Clara's words echoed in his mind. He remembered how Pedro had looked at him with gratitude after the fight, as if he were a hero. "But what if I fail? What if I can't be what he needs?" He looked at Clara, frustration evident in his tone. "We all fear failure, but what matters is trying. You're not alone in this," she asserted, placing her hand on his arm. "The pain never disappears completely, but you can transform it into something new." Josue took a deep breath, absorbing her words. He knew Clara was right, but the wound was still fresh and guilt consumed him. "I just wish I could have done more for them. If I had been more attentive, maybe." "Josue, don't blame yourself. What happened wasn't your fault," Clara said, her look understanding. "You need to forgive yourself. Just remember that you can still do something good in this world." Translation. He looked down, reflecting. "Do you think there's hope for me? That I can really find my way back?" "Yes, I believe so," Clara smiled. "And who knows? Maybe the friendship with Pedro is the first step. You might rediscover your life alongside him." Josue felt a small spark of hope ignite in his heart. He was a broken man, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to rise again. He looked toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I will try, Clara. I will try to be better." Josue walked nervously toward Pedro's school, his heart racing in his chest. He always felt anxious going there, not just because of the boy, but because of the sense of being in a world that was no longer his. As he approached the gate, his mind filled with images of his old life when his daughter used to run happily around the school, full of dreams and laughter. Now all that remained were memories and the pain that accompanied them. Upon entering the courtyard, He spotted Pedro, who was with a group of children. The boy seemed more animated than usual, but as soon as Josue drew near, Pedro's happiness faded, and he distractedly looked down at the ground. Josue sensed something was troubling him, but before he could ask, an imposing figure appeared. It was Roberto, Pedro's father, who had just parked his luxurious car and was walking toward the school gate. Josue felt a chill in his stomach. Roberto's presence made him feel small and insignificant, as if his own worth drained away in comparison to the image of success that Roberto projected. But curiosity pushed him forward. He couldn't just walk away. Pedro needed him. However, as he got closer, their eyes met, and an awkward silence enveloped the atmosphere. "Josue?" Roberto asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" "I came to pick up Pedro," Josue replied, trying to remain calm. "He called me to help at school." Roberto frowned, the surprise quickly turning into suspicion. "And you think that's appropriate? I'm not sure it's good for him to have you so close." "Appropriate?" Josue felt a surge of anger, but he took a deep breath. "Pedro just wants someone who cares about him, Roberto. He doesn't need your wealth or your status. He needs a father." The tension in the air was palpable, and the children around them began to realize something was happening. Pedro, silent, looked from one to the other, confused and worried. He didn't want the situation to escalate, but he didn't know how to intervene. "Why are you talking like this? You know nothing about being a father." Roberto shot back, his voice raised. "What do you have to offer? A life on the streets? A shadow of what a real man is? I can be what he needs," Josue replied, his tone now more assertive. "I may not have a fancy car or an office, but I have love and compassion. That's what matters, isn't it?" The conversation quickly turned into a game of accusations and defenses, revealing the tension that had built up between them. Deep down, Roberto was grappling with his own dilemma. He felt guilty for not being present in Pedro's life, but the pressure to be the perfect father pushed him further away. "You don't know what I face. You don't know what it means to be a father in a world like this," Roberto shot back, his voice thick with emotion. Josue stared intently into Roberto's eyes. "But I know what it's like to lose a family, and I know I can't let Pedro go through the same. He needs you, Roberto, but you also need him." In that moment of tension, an unexpected revelation hung in the air. Both were so focused on their own pains and resentments that they hadn't realized the reality that united them. With an incredulous air, Josue said, You are my brother." Roberto shook his head, confused. "What do you mean by that? This doesn't make sense." "Our father? He had another family before you. I'm the forgotten son, the one who chose not to get involved in your world. But I've always been here." The truth began to emerge, and with it, emotions intensified. Roberto stood frozen. Josue's words echoed in his mind, challenging everything he knew about his own story. "You can't be serious. This is madness. I know it's hard to believe, but it's true. I'm your half-brother, and that changes everything." Josue continued, his voice now softer. "We're both struggling with the same shadows of the past. We need to understand each other, and more importantly, we need to be better for Pedro." Silence fell between them as the reality of the revelation settled in. Josue looked at Pedro, who was watching the scene with wide eyes, absorbing the gravity of what was happening. Both men realized they were facing a new opportunity, a chance to rewrite their stories and perhaps find a way together to become the fathers that Pedro deserved. The tension hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Josue watched from a distance, his heart racing and his mind in turmoil. He had just discovered that Roberto, Pedro's father, was not just a successful businessman but also his half-brother. The revelation left him in a state of confusion, a mix of relief and resentment. As his thoughts spun, Roberto, on the other hand, was at home confronting his father about the truth he had just uncovered. "You never told me about him," Roberto exclaimed, his voice trembling with emotion. The atmosphere in the living room was tense. The walls seemed to echo his words. He gestured nervously while his father, a man with a rigid posture and a stern gaze, remained seated on the couch, avoiding his son's look. "I did it to protect you, Roberto. His life is not something you should want to get involved in," the father replied, his voice deep, resonating with an authority that did not waver. "Protect? You don't understand anything. He's my brother, and I only met him by chance. Look at me, I'm lost, and you still have the audacity to tell me you did this for me." Roberto was agitated, his hands gripping the table in front of him as if he wanted to vent all the frustration that had built up over the years. The old man sighed, his face marked by age and the choices he had made. You don't know what it's like to have a broken family, Roberto. I wanted you to have a better life, away from problems. And this is what you call a better life? Ignoring the existence of a brother? Ignoring the pain this has brought to both of us? Roberto's words sliced through the silence like a sharp blade. He felt a knot in his throat, the anger and pain mixing in his chest. Meanwhile, Pedro, who had been playing in the yard, walked into the living room, sensing the tension in the air. He looked at the two men and realized something was wrong. "Dad, what's happening?" the boy asked, his voice trembling, reflecting the anxiety he felt. Roberto lowered his head, unsure how to answer his son. Josue, who was outside listening, saw Pedro and immediately felt a wave of compassion. He knew the boy was caught between two father figures, each representing a different part of his life. "Pedro, come here," Roberto finally said, trying to compose himself. He gestured for his son to come closer, but Pedro's expression was one of confusion. The boy hesitated, glancing at Josue, who was subtly shaking his head in encouragement. "I don't understand. Why are you so angry, Dad?" Pedro asked, his innocent gaze reflecting a sincerity that touched Josue's heart. He remembered how in his darkest moments Pedro's presence had brought him unexpected light. I'm just trying to do what's best for you, son," Roberto said, his voice softer now but still heavy with tension. "It's just that I feel lost, like I'm failing you. But you don't have to do it all alone. Josue is here, he cares about me," Pedro replied, looking at Josue, who smiled back, encouraging him to continue. "He helps me to be stronger. Why can't you give yourself a chance, Dad?" Roberto looked at his son, and in that moment, Pedro's expression made his heart open a little. He saw the genuine need in his son for someone to be there for him, someone he could trust, and he realized that maybe he himself was the one pulling away. "I don't want you to have to choose between us," Roberto said, his voice now loaded with emotion. Josue, who had been listening to everything, felt a wave of empathy for Pedro's father. He knew that, just like him, Roberto was carrying his own pains and struggles. "No one needs to choose, Roberto. Life is complicated, but we can find a way to do this together. It doesn't have to be like this," Josue said, his voice filled with sincerity. Pedro looked back and forth between them, feeling hope rekindling. He wanted both of them to understand each other and find a way to reconcile. "Let's try to be a family even if it's hard," he suggested, a glimmer of determination in his eyes. The room fell silent, and the tension began to dissipate, like mist at dawn. Josue felt that in that moment, through pain and confusion, there was an opportunity for healing. He wanted to believe there could be a new beginning, not just for him but for Roberto and Pedro as well, and that together they could face the challenges ahead. The morning was sunny and full of life, with the joyful voices of children echoing through the park as families gathered for the renovation project. Josue was there, wearing a worn-out t-shirt and a battered cap, but his face carried the determination of someone who had found a new purpose. He watched the children play, remembering his own daughter, and a mix of pain and hope filled his heart. Roberto arrived, parking his luxury car in a corner of the lot. The contrast between their lifestyles was evident, but both were there for a greater reason. Pedro. As Roberto approached, Josue felt a chill in his stomach. The tension between them still hung in the air, but they were willing to try for Pedro's sake. "Hey, Josue," Roberto said, trying to sound casual, but the hesitation in his voice was palpable. "Ready to work?" Josue nodded but couldn't hide his wary look. "I'm here to help Pedro. I hope you're here for the same reason." Roberto took a deep breath, realizing he needed to shed his pride. "Yes, I really want to reconnect with him. I don't want him to feel like I don't care." "That's a good start," Josue replied as they headed toward where Pedro was a bit further ahead, chatting animatedly with other boys. Pedro waved when he saw them, a radiant smile lighting up his face. "Dad, Josue, look what I brought." He showed them a bag of toy tools, excitement shining in his eyes. Josue couldn't help but smile. "Great, Pedro. We're going to need all the help we can get." The three of them began to work together. The first task was to clear the area where they would plant new trees. As they piled up branches and leaves, the dynamic began to change. The teamwork broke the ice, and with each laugh from Pedro, Josue and Roberto seemed to feel a little more at ease with one another. "You know, I used to do this with my daughter," Josue commented, not thinking too much. "She loved helping to plant flowers." Roberto looked at him, his expression softer. "I've never done these things with Pedro. I always thought he needed something more important, like piano lessons or sports." But he needs you too, Roberto, Josue said, pausing for a moment to look into his brother's eyes. Sometimes what kids want most is just quality time with their parents. Roberto pondered those words. I hadn't thought of it that way. I just wanted him to have opportunities. Like I didn't. Maybe you've missed something important by trying to give him everything you didn't have, Josue replied sincerely. Being present is what really matters. Pedro, who had been listening to the conversation, approached. Can I help? I also want to learn how to plant. The excitement in the boy's voice brought a genuine smile to Roberto's face. Of course. Let's plant these trees together, Roberto said, his voice more animated. He crouched next to Pedro, grabbing a spade and starting to dig. As they worked, the atmosphere began to shift. Roberto and Josue shared more laughs, and the tension that once existed between them seemed to fade away. They were united by a greater purpose, and Pedro's presence reminded them of what truly mattered. Look, Dad, I did it, Pedro exclaimed, lifting a small tree out of the ground. Let's plant it here. Yes, that's right, my boy, Roberto replied, with a sparkle in his eyes that Josue hadn't seen before. You're doing a great job. Josue watched the scene, feeling a wave of emotion. Pedro, you're doing really well. This park is going to be amazing. And you'll come here all the time, right, Josue? Pedro asked, hope in his voice. I promise, my friend. I'll always be around, Josue replied, confident that no matter what happened, he would always be present in Pedro's life. As they continued to work, Josue and Roberto exchanged glances that spoke more than 1,000 words. Both were realizing that despite the wounds of the past, it was possible to build something new. And on that sunny morning under the shadow of the bridge, a new family was beginning to form, united by pain, but driven by hope. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, as the community gathered for the inauguration of the renovated park. Josue, alongside Pedro and Roberto, looked around, feeling the vibrant energy of the people who had come together to celebrate that moment. The laughter of children playing, the smiles of neighbors, and the sense of accomplishment filled the air with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. Look, Josue, look at the slide, Pedro exclaimed, pointing to the shiny, colorful new structure that was now part of the park. His face was lit up with joy, and Josue couldn't help but smile at the genuine happiness of the boy. It was as if Pedro had become a small light in his life, guiding him out of the darkness he had been in. Roberto, observing the interaction between the two, felt a wave of emotion. He approached Josue, who was leaning against one of the park benches. You know, I didn't expect this renovation to touch so many lives. It's incredible to see the community united like this, Roberto said, his tone reflective. Yeah, it's more than just a park. It's a fresh start for all of us, Josue replied, looking at Pedro's face, which was now surrounded by friends, laughing and playing. As the inauguration ceremony drew near, the crowd began to gather in front of the small stage that had been set up. A community representative stepped up to the microphone, thanking everyone involved in the project and highlighting the value of unity and teamwork. Josue felt emotional, remembering all the hours he and Pedro had spent together planning and renovating the park. When the representative finished, Roberto stood up, drawing everyone's attention. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the words he was about to say. Hi everyone, I'm Roberto, Pedro's dad, and honestly I can't find the words to describe how I feel right now. For a long time I was so focused on work and success that I lost sight of what really matters. My family, he began, his voice faltering slightly. I watched my son go through tough times and I wasn't there for him like I should have been. But Josue showed me a new perspective. He helped me see what it truly means to be a father. So I want to apologize to you, Pedro. Roberto looked into his son's eyes, which were filled with a mix of hope and doubt. Apologies don't bring back the time we lost, but I want to change. I want to be the father you deserve, and more importantly, I want you to know that I'm here, now and always. Roberto continued as tears streamed down Pedro's face. I just wanted you to be here more often, Dad. I always hoped you could come to my performances or even just play with me a little, Pedro replied, his voice choked but firm. He stepped closer to his father and hugged him, a gesture of affection that carried all the weight of longing and hope. Josue watched the scene, feeling his heart warm. He knew that this moment was just the beginning of a new phase in the lives of Pedro and Roberto, but also in his own life. When the embrace between father and son ended, Roberto turned to Josue, a mix of gratitude and recognition in his gaze. Thank you, Josue, I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come into Pedro's life. You're an incredible man, Roberto said, extending his hand to Josue. I just did what anyone would do. Pedro is a special kid. He deserves all the good things, Josue replied, shaking Roberto's hand firmly. In that moment, an unspoken truth hung between them. The pain of the past was beginning to dissipate, making way for the construction of a brighter future. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the park, Josue, Pedro, and Roberto joined everyone else to celebrate not just the renovation of the park but a new dynamic in their lives. Pedro's laughter and the new connection among the three were about to create a new story, a story of redemption, love, and family. During the celebration of the park's inauguration, the atmosphere was one of joy and renewal. Children ran among the new playground equipment while adults exchanged smiles and greetings. Josue, somewhat apart, observed the scene with a mix of happiness and apprehension. He had found a new type of family in Pedro and Roberto, but the emotional scars still held him back from a painful past. The upbeat music played in the background, but his mind was distant, reflecting on everything he had lost and what he might gain. As he contemplated the joyful interactions around him, a stern-looking man approached. He was dressed in a dark suit and wore a grave expression that didn't fit the festive atmosphere. Josue felt a chill in his stomach as he noticed the man was headed straight for him. When the stranger got closer, he introduced himself as Detective Mendez from the local police. "Josue, right?" said the detective, his deep voice cutting through the euphoria of the moment. "I have something important to tell you." "What about?" Josue asked, feeling tension rising. He was already used to pain and loss, but he hadn't expected anything more disturbing to come up that day. "I'm investigating the accident that killed your wife and daughter. I've uncovered new information that may be relevant to you," Mendez replied, looking into Josue's eyes with a sincerity that left no room for doubt. Josue felt a knot form in his throat. He wasn't ready to relive that pain. "What did you find out?" He tried to keep calm, but anxiety pulsed in his chest. "The driver who caused the accident was under the influence of alcohol. He is still on probation," the detective explained, his tone a mix of empathy and sorrow. "You and your family have the right to sue him. I'm here to help you with that process if you want." The detective's words echoed in Josue's mind. The idea of seeking justice, of making the man who destroyed his life pay, seemed tempting. But at the same time, he remembered the new life he was beginning to build with Pedro and Roberto. I don't know," he murmured, looking down at the ground. "I understand this is difficult," Mendez said, sensing the internal struggle of the man before him. "But think about what you and your family deserve. Sometimes facing the past is the first step to moving forward." Josue saw Pedro and Roberto interacting with others, laughing and playing. The boy's smile lit up his face, and the pride he felt in being an important part of his life grew with each passing day. "True redemption isn't about revenge," Josue said, his voice steady, "but in building something new. I don't want to be a prisoner of my past anymore." Detective Mendez nodded, understanding the depth of the choice before Josue. "Sometimes, forgiveness is more powerful than vengeance, but the decision is yours." Josue paused for a moment, watching the happiness radiating from Pedro and the growing bond he had formed with Roberto. He took a deep breath, feeling the pain and longing, but also hope. "I don't want to look back at the past with anger," he declared, his determination reflecting what he had learned in recent weeks. "I want to build a future for Pedro, for me, and for Roberto." The detective smiled, admiring the courage emanating from Josue. "Then, if you change your mind, I'll be here to help. You have more strength than you realize." Josue nodded, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. He turned to observe the celebration again, now with a new perspective. The pain was still there, but hope and love were emerging strongly. As he approached Pedro and Roberto, he felt he had found the path to redemption, not through revenge but through the creation of meaningful connections and the love that could arise even from the ashes of his pain. "Hey, you two," he called out, a smile on his face. "Let's take a picture together. This day is special and I want to remember this new beginning forever." Pedro and Roberto quickly turned, grinning at the sight of Josue. "Of course, let's capture this moment," Pedro replied, running over to him. Roberto followed closely behind, and together they formed a new family, united by pain, but propelled by the hope and love they were nurturing. The camera clicked, and in that instant Josue knew he was on the right path. the path to redemption.